front row crowd. So. Oh, there's one announcement I forgot to mention. We do want to go back to having a snack time directly after our service. Last Sunday, because the crowd was smaller and we had some leftover cookie dough, we just baked some cookies and served those. But starting next Sunday, we'd really like to just have a time for people to stay and talk and get to know each other a bit right after the service. So if you'd like to be part of that, without thinking, oh no, now I'm in charge of hospitality. You're not in charge of hospitality if you just want to provide some snacks sometime. And so Angela and I will come up with a way to make sure that you can connect with us, or even a sign-up, or whatever it might be, just so that there's something to eat while we're all sitting or standing around after church getting to know each other. So, okay, we're back in the book of Matthew. It's been a bit of a break since being in the book of Matthew, and so we're finishing up chapter 16 today. And I'm sure you don't remember, and it's totally okay if you don't remember, but actually the second Sunday or third Sunday in August, when we did our introduction to the book of Matthew, so third Sunday in August, you all remember what we talked about, of course. And we talked about Peter's testimony about who Jesus is. And so today, as we've worked through the entire book of Matthew up to this point, we really want to stop at the second half of Matthew chapter 16 and look at a few verses there more closely. I'm going to go ahead and read through the whole passage for us and then kind of break it down a little bit. But our topic is take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. So let's go to the next slide. Let me just read this passage. No, go ahead and skip that one. This is actually an old one. Yep, that's the one. From time to time, and I might double check with you to make sure I gave you the right one. But that's okay. But let me read this first. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your word. Thank you that you speak to us through your word. Thank you that you care about us, that you love us so, so deeply. Father, I pray that as we look at this, would your Holy Spirit please teach us? Would you help us to just be willing to be still and to remember that you're God, and to let you speak to us and let you change our lives. We can't even change our lives on our own, Lord. We need you to do that. So I pray that now, as we listen, as we read, that we'd be open to what you have for us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Really quick admin thing. Can you go to the next slide? I think I gave you the wrong file. No. So there's a PDF on that thumb drive. Can we just work off the PDF? And I'm really sorry. These are actually last Sunday's notes. So my apologies to you. I mistitled one of them. Okay. So what we want to do, though, is we want to look at this passage just that we read in Matthew chapter 16, where the disciples, Jesus talks about his death. But to understand this passage about Jesus' death, we actually want to go back in Matthew chapter 16. And I want to just review with you really briefly what's going on here in Matthew chapter 16. And this is what we often call the confession of Jesus, of Peter. Peter confessing that Jesus truly is the Messiah. If you have your Bibles, you can turn into Matthew 16. verses 13 to 20. And then in a minute, we'll probably have the PDF up for this. If not, we'll just work and I'll slow down a little bit and make sure you get what you want here, what you need here from the verses. And this is the part where what we've had is we've just had the feeding of the 5,000. We've had Jesus walking on water, passing his disciples. We've had a few more miracles. We've had the feeding of the 4,000. And now people are wanting to make Jesus the king because he's providing for their physical needs. He's feeding them. They see all the miracles that they're doing. They see all these things. And there we go. Thank you guys for your flexibility. We'll go to the third one. Yes, that's the one. Thank you to the sound and the tech crew. You guys are fantastic. There we go. And let's actually go. Let's go back one, the second slide, sorry. There we go. So this is backing up to Matthew 16. And so what has happened is that they've crossed the lake, they're in this region, the feeding of the 4,000 happened, the disciples have seen Jesus do the miracles, they themselves have seen how they were doing miracles, because earlier Jesus sends the disciples out and he gives them power and authority to do miracles and to drive out demons. And so then finally Jesus comes to this point, they're in Caesarea Philippi in the northern part of Israel, and he finally asks his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? So Jesus asked them, who do people say that I am? And so they replied to him, and they gave him these four options. Say, well, some people say you're John the Baptist, some people say that you're Elijah, some people say that you're Jeremiah, or you're one of the other prophets. And so the people are able to make those statements because the people know the Old Testament scripture. And they know that a prophet will return, Elijah will return. And John the Baptist, and he did the miracles, but they just weren't sure. They weren't able to put it together properly. And so Jesus asked his disciples, he says, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter, for the disciples, as the spokesperson for the disciples, he answers and he says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And so Peter recognizes all the different parts, all the different things that he's seen, which again, if you remember all the way back, Matthew's point is to kind of have a logical, almost court-like presentation, evidence-based presentation that Jesus is indeed the Messiah King. And so Peter recognizes it and says, you're the Messiah. You're not John the Baptist, you're not Elijah, you're not Jeremiah, you're not one of the other prophets. You are actually the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus' response here is twofold. He says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. You see, finally the disciples understood. And Jesus says, but don't tell other people that I'm the Messiah. Why would Jesus do that? You'll remember, if you go back a few chapters, immediately after Jesus fed the 5,000, he's told his disciples immediately. Remember that word that we read it several times in Matthew and in Mark. Immediately he sent his disciples away across the lake, and he dispersed the crowd. Because the crowd, like I said, they'd seen his miracles, and now they saw that Jesus could actually feed them. And what better king is there than one who can do miracles and has power, and one who makes sure that every day I get more than my fill? He said, don't tell them any of this. And so this is the context that we get to today's passage here. So let's go on to these verses. The first part of these verses on Matthew 16, verse 21. This is the next slide there. It says, from that time on. So after the disciples recognized that Jesus is the Messiah, Peter spoke and said, yes, you are the Messiah. And from that time onward, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and be raised to life on the third day. See, this is really interesting here. that this phrase here that's used is this word that's used is the word must. You see, in the Old Testament prophecies, again, which the people would have known, in Isaiah we have a whole series of prophecies. Starting with Isaiah 40, we have the suffering servant. And the suffering servant prophecies tell us that when the Messiah comes, when he comes, when the king comes, that he will suffer. And so at this time, the people that were in Israel, they didn't quite understand that the Messiah and the suffering person were the same person. You see, they thought the Messiah would come and he would overthrow the political oppression, he would take care of their physical needs, he would perform miracles, he would do all of those things, but they didn't understand that the prophecies in Isaiah 40, the suffering servant prophecies, 40 onward, were also telling us what the Messiah would be like and what the Messiah must do. And so Jesus very, very clearly says, this one, he must suffer, he must go to Jerusalem, and he must be killed on the third day and be raised to life. Now, of course, there's another part to this must. The first must is that he has to fulfill the prophecies. Jesus didn't come on this earth to kind of say, oh good, all these prophecies were good, but now let me do my own thing. No, he came and he fulfilled the prophecies. The second must here is that Paul addresses this in the book of Romans when he says over and over again, the wages of sin is death. Someone must die. And you dying and me dying and some great man dying is not enough. There must be a punishment to pay because the wages of sin is death. And Paul develops this really beautifully as we go from Romans 3, Romans 5, Romans 6, going on and on and on. But there must be someone who lived a perfect life, who is worthy, who can carry the suffering and the sin and the shame of the entire world. This must happen. So Peter takes him aside, and he begins to rebuke him. Peter kind of being the spokesperson here. And the word rebuke here is a very, very, very strong word. And I try to think of what's like a really good way to use this word rebuke. And it's like, I couldn't think of it. Just imagine like someone's just really like, it's a mania, right? Like if you speak Chinese, like scolding and just like telling you everything that's wrong and it's not right. And, it's like on and on and on. This kind of an idea. And Peter says to him, and he says, never, Lord. This shall never happen to you. What did Peter just say? A few verses before this, he says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So he declared the truth that was made known to him by God, right? Because it says Jesus says to Peter, you wouldn't know this if God the Father had not revealed it to you. And now Peter says, never. This will never happen to you. Jesus turns to Peter and he says, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Now, I think this passage is a little bit difficult to understand. And I think we can't fully understand this passage, or I shouldn't say fully. That makes it sound like I have it fully understood. As I was learning about this, I was pointed back to Matthew chapter 4. And Mark and Luke also have this, where we deal with the temptation of Jesus. And we have to understand the temptation of Jesus to understand what's going on here. And we don't have to get caught on, was Peter now, did Satan enter Peter and was Peter demon-possessed and all of those things. I think that's not the point. The point here is that Jesus is faced with yet another temptation by Satan. And if you read in Luke chapter 4:13, and this is, we went through the book of Matthew, but we're also going to look at the parallel account of what happens in Jesus' life from Mark and Luke and some in John as well. And Luke chapter 4 says this, that after the temptation of Jesus, he, Satan, left him until an opportune time. See, Matthew and Mark don't tell us that. But Luke tells us that Satan left Jesus until an opportune time. And so now we get to an opportune time again. When we look back at the temptation of Christ, we have three temptations. The first one was turn stone to bread. Take care of your physical needs. Jesus gave the people everything they needed. He fed the 5,000. He fed the 4,000. Okay? It says, if you jump down from this highest place, then angels will come and protect you. The supernatural protection that Jesus could have if you just asked for it. And the third one, look at all these nations. If you worship me, if you bow down to me, you will have all these things. And so Bible scholars and theologians say that Satan was tempting Jesus to have the glory without the cross, the power without the suffering. He could have had all those things had he given in to the temptations of Jesus. But Jesus said, no, that's not my way. I have all the power. It's been given to me. I will get all the glory. I have all that, but we will do it my way on my terms, like what the Father wants and what he desires. And so Jesus, as he's talking about going into Jerusalem, and we get him going into Jerusalem very quickly if we follow the story chronologically, Jesus says, there's one more temptation here. I must go to Jerusalem. I must die. Here, I must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hand of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. So I must suffer from my own people, and I must be killed and be raised to life on the third day. And Satan says, wait. You know, you can have the glory and the kingdoms and the power, and you can have all those things. Don't go. It's another temptation of Christ that he's being faced with here. And so Jesus, like the first time, responds very strongly and says, get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, because you don't have the concerns of God, but only human concerns in mind. Let's go on. And then Jesus says to his disciples, and I've done this again like I did a few weeks ago, where we have the Matthew 16 and the Luke 9 passage, because I think it's always interesting to kind of parallel them and see where's a phrase here and there that we can compare and we can learn something from. So Jesus said to his disciples this paradox, this big paradox of our faith, of the Christian faith. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. And then he said to them, and let me read it from Luke 9, verse 23, 24. Then he said to them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. So what Jesus is saying here is very interesting. Jesus hasn't been crucified yet when he says this. And he already says, you must pick up your cross before he is crucified himself. And so some critical Bible scholars will say, look, this was written retro, these parts were added in later. But when we understand that to the Jewish people who lived at that time, the symbol, what the cross actually meant, we can see, yes, that's not the case at all. You see, the cross for us today, and you all know this, is a nice thingy you put on your necklace. Forgot what those things are called, right? To show that we're Christians. Or if you're really, be careful, how should I say this here? Really cool. Is that still a word, Eric? No, it's not a word anymore? Like you might tattoo a cross on your body somewhere, right? Like that would be really whatever the new cool is, okay? And so for us, the cross is kind of a symbol of identification that we're Christians. 2,000 years ago, the symbol of the cross meant something totally different. Like you would never today, tattoo, I'm European, I'm from Germany, right? So I would never tattoo a picture of a guillotine on my arm because the guillotine symbolizes death, right? I would never tattoo an electric chair or something like that onto my arm because when I look at that, I think of suffering and death. You see, the cross is the same symbol as a guillotine. Oh, I guess that's several hundred years ago. I'm not that old. But the electric chair or whatever symbolizes death, that's what it meant to them. And what people would have to do, people who were condemned would have to do, was they would have to pick up that cross beam of their cross and carry it up to the place of where they would be crucified. And we have this in the story of Jesus too, that he had to carry his cross, his beam, up to the place where he would be crucified. And so this is the symbol here that Jesus uses, and he says the cross means death. And what you have to do is, if you want to be my disciple, is you have to die. Then you have to deny yourself. You must deny yourself. You have to die and then follow me. And that's where we have that paradox. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me will find it. Whoever wants to save their life for their own sake, we'll see that in the next couple of verses here, will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me, that person will find it. Now in Luke, we have an interesting word that's in here. Because Luke adds the word daily. You must pick up your cross daily. You must die daily. And so it makes us wonder. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. And then I'll get back to that. It says you must pick up your cross daily. Back to Matthew 16. He goes on with this paradox. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? You see, if you get everything that you want, if you can take all the power, you get all the glory, you get all the kingdoms, you get everything, and yet you forfeit your soul, what good will that be for you? Or Luke says, forfeit their very self. You see, to this not dying to yourself, there's a spiritual, eternal consequence. Deny yourself, die, follow me. There is a long-term, eternal, spiritual consequence to this. And Jesus describes it as losing your soul or forfeiting their very life. Because one day, when I come back, there's two ways it's described here. One day when the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he'll come with glory in his angels, and he will reward each person according to what they have done, or the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. So there are eternal consequences to this decision to deny ourselves, to pick up our cross daily, and to follow him. And I think for us, and this is not always the funnest thing to hear, but we have to understand that the Christian life is a life of submission and a life of sacrifice. It's not a life where I pursue fulfillment and self-actualization or realization. See, the Christian life is a life of submission, and it's a life of sacrifice. And again, the paradox in that is that in that life of submission, in that life of denying myself, in that life of taking on my cross and dying daily and following Jesus, in that sacrifice, I can have tremendous joy and I can have tremendous hope. So the Christian life is not a life of woe is me, life is so hard, it's supposed to be really hard, and I'm just going to kind of keep going along here all the time. No, it's a life of I'm submitting, I'm sacrificing, it's costing, I have to pay. And in that suffering, I have a tremendous sense of joy and a tremendous sense of hope. Because Jesus tells me, I'm always with you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. And I'm coming back again. Because Jesus is coming back again, we can have that tremendous sense of hope. Now, I thought to myself, there's nothing new there. There's nothing here that you've never heard. And yet when I always have this, when I always read this passages about taking on my cross daily and dying to myself, I always have this kind of this disconnect, Like there's this disconnect because I understand that the disciples were later on killed, that Jesus, of course, was killed, that the early Christians suffered tremendously for their faith, that all over the world there are people who are suffering tremendously for their faith and willing to die for their faith, And I remember being in Sunday school, and it's like, I don't know if it's a good way to teach Sunday school or not, but raise your hand if you're willing to die for Jesus. And maybe we don't do that anymore, I hope. And this idea of like, oh, I have to be willing to die for Jesus, I have to be willing to die for Jesus. And yes, I understand that, but somehow there was this total disconnect to my life. January 3rd was actually the anniversary, the 65th anniversary of a tremendous story that impacted my life too. And some of you may remember this, and you've seen the movie, The End of the Spear. And the 5 missionary couples, 5 men and 5 women, who went to Ecuador, and they wanted to share the gospel with the Huaorani tribe, or the Auca, which the actual tribe name is the Huaorani. And they had been flying over, and Nate Saint and Jim Elliott and those stories, and it had a tremendous impact on my life. They reached out to this village in the jungles of Ecuador, and they flew their airplanes over, and they dropped gifts, and finally they were able to make a connection and meet with them. And they were in the riverbed, and all 5 of them got killed. And then Nate Saint's wife, Jim Elliott's wife, went back and was a missionary to them. And I remember, in the 70s and early 80s, that was like the story of modern martyrdom. And it was like, oh, everybody should aspire to living that kind of life. And it was had a big impact on my life, but it was so hard to make that connection to my standing here and saying, yes, I have to die for Jesus. And I wonder if we can take this principle, and Luke says the word daily, right? So it's not a one-time to be willing to be killed and be a martyr for Jesus. That may come for some of us. I don't know that. But I think if we leave the lesson there and say, well, okay, when that time comes, I'm willing to pick up my cross and die, then I think we're missing the point here. You see, Luke says, pick up your cross daily. Die daily. So obviously it's not a physical martyrdom that he's talking about here. He's talking about something else. And so as I was thinking on this and praying and asking God, please show me what I'm supposed to share here, 3 things came to my mind. And so what I'm doing here for the next 10 minutes is I want to share you 3 things that I need to learn, 3 areas of my life where I need to learn to die to myself, to pick up my cross daily. And the first area, super fun and exciting one. What does it mean in my marriage? So, I've been married for 23 over 23 years now, okay? No, I'm right, it's right, because 99. 24 is coming up on July 31st. And it's I wonder, in my life, in my marriage, what does it mean for me to deny myself, to pick up my cross daily, and to follow Jesus? What does it mean to die to myself in my marriage? Ephesians 5 is kind of a go-to passage when it comes to family relationships and marriage relationships. And it's a controversial passage. And it was extremely controversial when Paul wrote it. But the part that was controversial when Paul wrote it is the opposite part of what's controversial today. You see, at Paul's time, this would have been normal. Wives, submit to your husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church's body, for which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands and everything. No one would have said anything at that time 2,000 years ago in Ephesus. And then Paul goes on and says something so controversial. He says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. You see, to love your wife was countercultural. To submit to your husband was cultural. And Paul says, no, you need to, as husbands, you need to love your wives. Now, one thing I think that we need to remember, when we look at this entire passage, we need to remember the topic sentence. This sentence is not about power, this sentence is about submission. And Andy Stanley, who's a pastor in the United States, he has this amazing phrase that's been convicting to me and encouraging to me. Marriage is a submission competition. See, marriage is a submission competition. Where my wife says, no, no, I want to submit to you. And I say, no, 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 I want to submit to you. No, 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 let me submit to you. No, 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 let me submit to you. And it's a submission competition. But what we have here, in this phrase, 25, is interesting. And we know that the greatest commandment is what? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus repeats this old covenant commandment, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And yet Jesus tells his disciples, I have a new commandment for you. And then he gives them the new commandment. And it's the same commandment. But you see, the new commandment that Jesus gives his disciples is to love others, not the way you love yourself, but the way that I have loved you. See, that's critical. The commandment is the same. The standard by which it's measured is different. And this is an example that Paul then takes and develops here. And he says, husbands, love your wife. So in my case, Uwe loved Madonna just like Jesus loved you, okay, and gave himself up for you. So, the way Jesus demonstrates his love to me is what? That while I was still a sinner, he died for me. How do I love my wife? It's not what I want, it's what she needs. It's not what I want, it's what she needs. Not what I want to do, not what I would like to see, not what I want, but what does she need? And I keep saying, no, it's not about me, it's about you. And how can I submit to what you need more and more and more? Because that submission is the most beautiful example of love that Jesus gave to us, that he would die for me, not after I've done all the good things, but that he would die for me while I am still a sinner. Let's keep going. What does it mean with my children? In my, I don't want to say my culture, because I guess it is kind of, because I grew up in a German home, so it is my culture. It's just been diluted a little bit over the years. And so family and the family name are very, very important in traditional German culture. Some of you don't know, I'm actually German. Both my parents are German. And so they were missionaries here in Taiwan, and a lot of times when you go overseas, you do everything you can to maintain your family culture. And so for a lot of you who went to the States with your parents, and your parents tried so hard, if you're Taiwanese background, your parents tried so hard to make sure you stayed Taiwanese, and you just said, leave me alone, I don't want to be, like, I have all my American friends. Well, it's kind of the same thing, except in reverse, for what happened with my family here. And so the family name is so, so, so important. And I realized a few years ago that so much of my parenting was actually more about how I thought other people would perceive me in public, and much less about what my children needed. Not saying don't discipline your kids, absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But so much of it was I parent so that other people would see, okay, he's the principal of a Christian school and he runs this Christian nonprofit and he does all these things. What's the expectation? I want my kids to not bring shame to the family name. If you come from a culture where shame is an important part of the culture, maybe you understand that. I was always kind of jealous of my American friends because their parents seemed to whatever, he's making his own decisions, he'll pay the consequences later. And I'm thinking, but the family name. And so here's a good reminder. Again in Ephesians, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so it may go well with you, that you may enjoy long life on earth. So not just let your kids run all over the place. No, you're disciplining your children. But don't exasperate them, or don't drive them to anger. Don't create in them this sense of bitterness towards you, but instead bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Nowhere in the training and in the instruction of the Lord does it ever say that the Maurer name has to look good. Nowhere does it ever say that the Maurer name, my last name, has to look good. So, it's a good reminder. Where can I die to myself when it comes to raising my children. Now, they're all 18 and above now, but still, it's just a different phase of parenting when we parent young adults. Let's go to the next one. What does it mean with my friends? My command is this: love each other as I've loved you. Again, there it is. The way I loved you. How has Jesus loved me? Well, he died for me. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. When it comes to your friends, what do my friends need more than what do I want? And this is not, again, in all of this, in all three of these, there's nothing here, that I should have maybe said this caveat earlier. It's not about letting people take advantage of you. That's not it at all. That's something totally, totally different, okay? Because that's giving, that's them, that's something they have to deal with, okay? But this is with my friends. What does my friend need more than what do I want? Where can I actually lay down my life for my friend? We have this great verse here, verse 15, where Jesus says, it used to be like this, but now it's like this. I no longer call you servants. Used to be I called you servants, right? Because it says no longer. That means before, that was a term. Because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, right now, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. When I look at my friends, when I look at people I meet, is it more about what I want out of them or what they need? When I look at my kids, is it more about how the Maurer name can look good and not be embarrassment? Because, my dad was a missionary in Taiwan. I'm involved in some kind of Christian work. It's like, all those, like hundreds and thousands of people in central Taiwan that know my dad would be like, oh, yeah, hey, Bobo, yeah. That pastor, whatever. Those of you understood that. Some of you understood that, right? Like the pastor's son, blah, 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 and not wanting that. And when I look at my wife, the more about I get what I want, the more about I give her what she needs and what she wants. I want to close with the passage. Well, let's go to this one again. And I want to close. Let me read this passage here again for you from today's text. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. Take up their cross, Luke says daily, follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. I want to close with a passage from Philippians. And you know this passage in Philippians. And it's an example of Jesus showing to us his humility and showing to us what it means to live for other people. Therefore, if any of you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort from his love, any common sharing in the Spirit, any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Go ahead. And then Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. We have, go ahead and go up to our questions. Again, a reminder, everything I read and heard today is true. What do I need to do in my own life? Everything I read and heard today is true. Who do I need to tell? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that you speak to us through your word. And I pray again for this morning. Would you please allow us to remember what you're teaching us, not what I'm saying, but what you're teaching us through your holy word. Thank you that you sent your Son to die for me, to die for every person here while I was still a sinner. It's nothing I did. It's what you did. That's your love for me. Lord, as I learn to pick up my cross daily, to say no to my desires and my wants, and to look to see what my wife needs, what my kids need, what my friends need. I pray that you would help me to have that humility, follow your example, be able to make them and you more important than myself. I pray this for all of us, Lord. Would you please teach us? Teach us to follow you. Teach us to pick up our cross daily. Teach us to deny ourselves. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We have our closing song, and during the closing song, we'll just pass the offering bags around and just kind of go through row by row for that.
If you'd like to stand up and we'll sing this together. I hope you know it. It's quite an old song.